Okay, let's take a look at the function y equals f of x, and more specifically, y equals x. The y-intercept of 0 and a slope of 1. Y equals f of x, which happens to be y equals x. And I'm going to make a table of values. So I'm going to say x and f of x and the square root of f of x. So if I have an x value of 0, my f of x is x, so that's 1. And, excuse me, let me start with a couple of negatives. Negative 1, and I get negative 1, and if I do 0 on the graph is 1, and if I do 1, I get 1, and I do the next value I'm going to do for x. Interesting, I'm going to do 4. You'll see why that is in a second. So now we want to draw the square root function. So we had the old function y equals f of x. And that function happened to be y equals x. So if we want to do y equals the square root of f of x, we're simply going to square root the function that we're talking about, root x. So now I want to graph root x. Now we've graphed root x many times today, but let's do it from the table of values. So we're simply going to square root the f of x values. We cannot square root a negative undefined. The square root, excuse me, incorrectly I put 1 where 0 should have been. The square root of 0 is 0, excuse me. And if I square root 0, it's 0. If I square root 1, it's 1. If I square root 4, it's 2. So let's go with this point with, first of all, we scribble off all the negative. We can't square root negatives. This point has an x value, has a y value of 0, and we square root it. It does not change. It's invariant. This point has a y value of 1. When we square root it, we get 1. It doesn't change. This point has a y value of 4. When we square root it, the square root of 4 is equal to 2. Most people forget about the x value that we were talking about, but this point with a y value of 4, 2 comma 4, and I square root the y value, I get the point, excuse me, 4 comma 4, and I square root the y value, I get the point 4 comma 2. Simply square rooting the y value. And my new function looks like this, the square root function that we've been talking about. So you can either play with the graph and simply square root the y values and don't forget about the x value that you were initially talking about, or you can write down the equation, whatever it is, y equals x, for example, and square root it and figure out what the new equation is and draw that with the table of values, or you can draw the first table of values and then simply square root the y values and get the new points on the graph. Remember, the x values don't change.